Next, awesome, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you for staying here to the end of the day as well. I'm going to be talking about a report that we released today. It's got the really exciting title of this, Cultural Heritage Capital, keep everyone happy with all the different things we need to mention in the names. I'm going to go straight into it. So I just want to give a brief idea of what the Culture and Heritage Capital Programme is. So it's an interdisciplinary approach to trying to better articulate the value of cultural heritage, something that we've traditionally not been very good at, and that can lead to not the best investment decisions for heritage. I think we're probably acutely aware that in the last 10 to 15 years, basically everywhere has been cut, and places that aren't health or pensions or maybe education have really taken the brunt of those cuts. So if we can demonstrate the value of heritage better, we can get better outcomes for heritage. So it's economics-led, but it's built on culture and heritage science and practice. And that's really important because heritage is actually often at direct conflict of the traditional economic measures we have. Everything that you will ever learn in economics says that as things get older, they deteriorate and they get less valuable. But with heritage, it's actually something quite different to that. We actually might see an appreciation of value. And it also undervalues the level of things such as your bespoke value, the value that you have of keeping your heritage for future generations. They all kind of break our normal economic models that we have. So then we must do something to sort that out. You can take kind of this place here. If we just used our traditional economic metrics, we could say, yes, you can pay for an event space here. There's a cafe and there's some tourists that come here. But that would completely not value all of the amazing things that can happen here. Even taking the last couple of days, all the knowledge transfer that has occurred within this building, those sort of things can't be measured currently with our current methods. And that's kind of what we're aiming to get to. And it's going to be long, it's going to be slow. It probably outdates anyone that's at Historic England now until we can kind of get this in a really good state that we're happy with, but we've begun to do it. I've kind of touched on all of this here. So the kind of why do we need it is that we've got no approach to doing this at the moment. And that means that it can lead to culture and heritage even being valued at zero, even though it has all of these non-market values. And then this is the DCMS bit. We've got the increasing need for DCMS to provide leadership. They are the people who are kind of governing this program. And then we're working with, they work with us, Historic England and Arts Council. And then we've brought in a lot of different academics. There's Arts and Research Humanities funding and all sorts of other people involved. And then the key outputs of the program is firstly to get a bank of evidence of values for a range of culture and heritage assets. Then there's supplementary guidance to the Green Book covering heritage capital. And then finally, a set of national culture and heritage capital accounts. And this is one of the first attempts to try and really do this now. So moving more onto the paper that we produced, these are a really short literature review of the type of methods done before to try and value how much heritage impacts your life satisfaction. At the moment, these are largely based around participation rather than passive and the kind of use that we do every day today. So we know quite concretely that going to visit a heritage site maybe once a month will have a noticeable impact on your life satisfaction. We can know that about mental health as well. And we also see quite nice things, I would say, and some negative things. We see that people in areas of higher levels of poverty, the effect of going to see heritage is actually significantly more. It has a better impact on your life satisfaction. However, on the contrary to that, we find that people's access to heritage is often less for people who are in areas of higher levels of deprivation. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, but we know those positive impacts exist. So then the research question that we were kind of asking is we wanted to know, is there an association between the density of culture heritage assets and their proximity to the residential areas? So that's your day-to-day encounters with heritage, not going to see big heritage sites, not going to, going to an English heritage or a National Trust site. We want it to be the day-to-day experiences. And does that exist after we control for individual and regional factors? So all of the things that we think that might impact your life satisfaction. And then the next question we were asking is, do different types of listed heritage assets influence the self-reported life satisfaction scores differently? So we had to think of a way that we can do this, and this is kind of how we came up to do it. So at the bottom, you've got the National Heritage List for England. That's what we call our dependent variables. That's what we're measuring, independent variable, and that's what we're measuring everything. And then what we did is we went and looked at what data can we get on that might impact your life satisfaction. And these are all of the ideas that we've basically come up with that might impact your life satisfaction that we can observe. Obviously, a large amount of people's happiness is based on unobservable characteristics, and we struggle a little bit more to do something with that, but that is the nature of this type of research. So then with that National Heritage List for England data, there's about 400 designated assets in the data set. If you map it, it looks like that, which is not very useful at this point. But it consists of listed buildings, monuments, registered parks and gardens, registered battlefields, protected rec sites, and World Heritage sites. If you're wondering what that looks in like a heat map type of way, it looks like this. This is technically a kernel density, and I'm not going to bore you with what the difference is between that, but red is indicating higher spots of it. Lighter colors are indicating less spots of it. And you can see, although you do get your patches around London, etc., it's pretty well dispersed across the whole of the country. On the left-hand one as well, you can see that the London doesn't come up as much, and that's because you basically with London got this really small point right in the centre that no one actually lives in, and that's not very useful if we're talking about day-to-day encounters. So the next question we had is then, what geography level could we use to do this? We wanted this to be as localized as we could possibly do. We wanted it to be about your day-to-day encounters. So you have output areas, which are the smallest geographical unit we have. And then we have local super output areas, which are kind of the next one up, and middle super output areas. We found that we could get as much data, the kind of optimal point of data that we could get was that local super output area. So we chose that one. So it covers about maybe 1,000 to 1,200 people living in one of them at a time. And then the next thing we had to do was basically think, how can we make this useful? So rather than just counting the number of heritage assets within those LSOAs, we thought, let's draw 1 kilometre centroid rings around the population-weighted centroid. And I hope I'm not losing anyone here, but basically that's where, on average, people live in these areas. So if we draw 1 kilometre around that, depending on how fast you walk, you're talking about maybe a 10, 15, 20 minutes within your residential house to be able to walk around. If a heritage asset doesn't exist within that 1 kilometre, we don't count it. It's not something that we're considering that you can encounter in your day-to-day lifestyle. This is quite a nice way of it looking, but quite often it looks like a huge mess, especially once you get into the more inner city areas. But we run this all through some GIS software. It's repeating itself. Now, this looks absolutely horrific up here, but basically what we're saying here is that we've got life satisfaction on the side, so that's our measure of well-being. It's reported as a level of 1 to 7 in the Understanding Society data. We then take that variable that I've just talked about with the 1 kilometre centroid rings, we throw that into a program, and then we throw all of those other control variables that we discussed earlier on. So that's household income, number of children you have, your ethnicity, your religion, anything we can observe that we think might impact your life satisfaction, we can control for that. And basically what that does, it takes away the element of what we might predict is that people who are in higher areas of in areas of higher amounts of listed buildings might be happier, but that might be because of other factors. We could probably safely assume that household incomes, for example, of those areas might be higher. So we need to take that away from that when considering that, and we need to isolate just that heritage element of it. And that's what we do through this regressional design. If you had economists here, it's actually not too difficult, and actually you just click a few buttons and it can do that. but the data side is the more difficult bit of it. And then we get this really horrible, absolutely horrific looking table. And again, I'm not going to bore anyone with all the details. Minus means it's negative. No minus means it's positive. And the stars signify how sure we are of these results. So we're saying how significant these are. So the big one that we're really interested in is that top one. And it's positive, and it's 3 stars. So that means that we are really confident of what we're finding. I think the actual statistical chance that this happened by chance is probably about 1 in 10,000. The kind of barrier we need it to be at is 1 in 20 to be able to go and release it in any kind of journal. So we're in the real areas of this hasn't really happened by chance. You can get some funny things here. So once you control for every factor influencing outcome, obviously on average, and it doesn't speak to anyone individually, you get funny aspects of having children apparently makes you less happy. Bit of a funny one. Women are always happier in these studies. I don't know if that's just because they rate themselves happier or whatever reason. And again, this is after you control for all of the other factors. So this is just a few of them, but we've got lots and lots of other controls within this thingy. So we control for stuff like your health, whether you own your own house, and more, basically. So with that, and it was touched a little bit earlier on with Eddie, is we can actually then convert this to a monetary figure. We use the HMR Treasury Green Book guidance, and we then worked with the co-author of that Green Book guidance, Christine Kukel from the London School of Economics, and we came up with this figure in the middle of £29 billion for the impact for all of England. And on an individual level, it's about £515. So what this is essentially saying, and it's a little bit weird in context, is saying that if I was to derive the same amount of happiness I get out of my cultural heritage within my very local area, what would someone need to compensate me for? How much would I have to be compensated in income to strip away my local heritage? Now, I imagine most people in this room are going to say I'd require far more than £515. This is obviously taking for the whole of England, and it obviously takes into account the area you're in. So for places in, what we found was Stoke-on-Trent, for example, had a really high value. So it would cost them more money. You'd have to compensate people in Stoke-on-Trent a lot more money than it would for, I'm not going to name any other locations, so I feel like you get into an issue there. And that's where we get this. So we get this £515 average impact. All the other numbers, we provide confidence intervals with all of these stuff. So you can have a lower value of a well-being. And just to be clear, what a well-being is here, or a well-be, is basically saying how much money, again, would I need to be compensated to go 1 unit higher in my happiness? So how much money would I have to be compensated to go from a 6 to a 7 in terms of my life satisfaction? They're all quite abstract concepts, and there is a little bit more complexity inside that. So, don't be thinking £13,000, 1 unit of I can be 10% happier. It's not quite like that, but it's the basic principle that we can do this with. The 1 kilometer, it might have just sounded absolutely abstract, and it was at first. But what we did was we tested to see how it reacted with the other variables we had. The only real crucial figure you're looking at is this 3.92 here. And that says that's our most significant one. So that's where we get the best statistical results. We then found that listed buildings were the main driver of this, partly because listed buildings are the most prevalent in the asset register, and they're also what's most around us. There's not many World Heritage sites, and not many within 1 kilometer of where you live. The frequencies look a bit funny here. That's because they can be counted more than once. Because if you in a inner city area, that 1 kilometer central ring can overlap quite a lot. The other one that we find significance with is parks and gardens. Now, we shied away from this finding a little bit because it's at this point in time not possible to differentiate the impact of being in an urban green space and having a nice green park next to you compared to its heritage element of being a registered park and garden. So we talk mostly about this listed building impact, but then we also, in our main variable, we're counting all of these things in, so including the 8 recs that appear in the data set as well. And this, again, really boring, close your eyes, don't look at that. But what this is basically telling us that is it's actually not the big grade 1 listed buildings that are driving this impact. It's those smaller grade 2, far more abundant listed building and heritage that drives the impact that we see with this life satisfaction. And I think that was a really, really interesting finding, basically, that you don't need a big, Stonehenge or a Palace of Westminster to get this happiness. That's not doing it, basically, or it's not deriving that happiness. It's that local buildings, it's those pubs, it's those, I think there's talk about it being cab stands and stuff like that in the newspaper. I think that's nicely edited, which is a lot big aggregation, basically. But yeah, it's that really lower level of, not lower level, but that more abundant level of heritage. This is going to be a repeat of basically what I said. And it should be 29 billion, not 28 billion. So apologies for that. Robustness checks. No one cares about this, but this just proves how robust that we've been with our findings. We've had this verified by Christine Krickel, like I said, the LSE lecture. And the idea of it is that we wanted to bring up a plausible figure that sounds reasonable to people. When people resonate with the number, they say, actually, that does sound realistic. And that means that we can use that in policy making decisions. Skip that, we're going to do more of this, basically, and we've got lots of more things coming out. And then here's some conclusions and policy recommendations, which I think I'm well above time. So we won't go too much into it, but it does bring it. It's a unique kind of methodological approach. It's evaluating non-market values. It can be used in social cost benefit analysis, which unfortunately is how Treasury makes most of their decisions, unless otherwise specified by a politician, basically. And yeah, let's stop there, basically.